Good morning. Welcome back to the Space Between Podcast, the only place to be for the dreamer, the doer, and the overcomer. I have a really special guest for you guys today. She is a women's empowerment warrior, a speaker, a solo mompreneur, a writer, and CEO at the iconic film, Miss Mindi Lyons. Thank you so much for taking time to land in the space between today. I'm so excited to be here with you.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm excited to spend this time together.
So I've been kind of following you, reading some of your content, and I love everything that you're about: intention, purpose, passion, all the things that resonate with my show. And I'm just going to read a clip here from something you wrote. If you're going to talk about what broke me, invite me to the table so I can tell you what I did with the pieces. Young lady, officially you've been invited to the table. Let's hear about it. Tell me when you were broken, where you were at the lowest point of your life, and what your mindset was like to get out of that space.
Oh, goodness. I feel like that has happened so many times. It's not just a one-time instance of I was broken and then I came back from that. It was numerous times of the proverbial rug of life being pulled out from under me. I would say that the first time that was of any major significance in order to note would be when I was 21. And just to give you a little bit of context behind that, I was someone who could not wait to move out of my house. I didn't have what I would consider to be a delightful childhood. And so at the stroke of 18, I moved out. I got married very quickly. I was pregnant and I had my first daughter when I was 19 years old. And then fast forward to being 21, some police officers showed up at our house and arrested my then husband, and he was put in prison. And I found myself a single parent overnight for the first time. And that was an enormous challenge. Obviously, there were complex dynamics surrounding that whole situation. And sorry, my throat. So had to move back in with my parents. So I had someone to help watch my daughter. I went back into the workforce, and 2.5 years later, I remarried to someone that was their family and our family were friends. Our sisters were best friends. So this was by no means someone that, we didn't know. And I thought that I had been around the block. I thought that I learned a few things from my first rodeo and trauma and drama that ensued from that marriage, but this one ended up being exponentially worse. And then 11 years or so into the marriage, a very well, I wouldn't say it's a similar situation, but he also ended up arrested and in prison. And so, as you can imagine, there was an enormous amount of humiliation. There was a lot of criticism. There was, of course, my own how did this happen? How could lightning strike twice in such severe ways? So, all of the circumstances surrounding all of that, of course, in the course of that marriage, there was a lot of verbal abuse, mental abuse, spiritual abuse, financial abuse. I mean, all the things. And along with that came with depression, darkness, massive feelings of hopelessness, helplessness. How did I end up here? How do I get out of this? And then we had added two children to the relationship, and so I had three children. He had brought his stepson into the relationship, so it was a lot, and I had gained a ton of weight. I'm an emotional eater, a stress eater, and so I had ballooned up to almost 300 pounds. So it was literally painful to exist. So that's kind of the cocktail of um, situations in my life that I found myself in unexpectedly. I would have never dreamed that that would be sort of the story that I would be telling. So yeah, that's kind of the summary of, I guess, the Cliff Notes version.
I love it. I love it. I resonate with all that. And I know you understand that there is purpose through the pain. And I want to talk about how God played a part in that in your journey. And did you ever doubt him at some point where you're like, why is this happening to me? Like, what are you trying to teach me here, God? Like what? Like what is going on?
Absolutely. I think that's really important. I was raised in a very, very conservative Christian environment, and I'm not knocking that. But it really brought in a lot of what I would call sort of religious oppression. And so I had a lot of guilt, a lot of shame. I had a lot of, if you don't live your life under these certain exact principles, then, you're not only lost, but you're bringing a whole bunch of people with you who you are influencing. So there was a lot of pressure, a lot of fear, and also just me as my own self and who I felt authentically was myself was not accepted. And so that created some very interesting family dynamics where I never felt like I fit in. I never felt like I could be my fully expressed version of myself. Um, but sort of to answer your question, I went through a roller coaster. God and I have been through an absolute roller coaster in our relationship because I didn't have what I would consider an accurate view of God growing up. I mean, I loved him and I respected him, but I also felt a lot of fear and a lot of, sorry, a lot of criticism, a lot of judgment, and that didn't feel good, obviously. So I would say that the first time that I felt really, I mean, of course, the divorce and all of that when I was 21, that sent me into a bit of a tailspin, but I was holding on to trust. I was holding on to faith and belief that somehow, those verses that we're told when we're kids, that all things work together for good and everything, that would somehow work out for me. But then in my second marriage, I went through what was a very traumatic event where I had lost a baby late in pregnancy. And that was extremely, I really got knocked off, the breath knocked out of me for that one. And that was a situation I couldn't understand. I couldn't understand why I didn't get to have my baby. I didn't understand. It was a very traumatic situation. I almost died in the process of removing our son. And it was I just couldn't understand why God was the only one who could have intervened. And for whatever reason, he didn't. They did an autopsy. They couldn't find any reason for my son not surviving the pregnancy. And so during that time, I was very angry at God. I went through a hard time in terms of my spirituality of going to church. I had a lot of belief instilled in me that to be a good Christian, you needed to go to church. And I did not want to go to church. I hated people telling me that all things work together for good. And I had one lady tell me sometime, why do you think that you're so special? Why not you? Why would something like this not happen to you? And that was brutal. And sometimes, I don't knock Christianity at all, but sometimes people just do not know what to say. And sometimes I have found in my own experience that, Christians, of course, they're walking their own path and their own journey, but I was not finding comfort in that community. I was finding the exact opposite, to the extent that I would bawl my eyes out every time I would go to church. It was a misery for me to attend, and I even stopped going for a period of time, and there was a lot of guilt about that. But through that process, and I mean this was a long process, not just for this particular reason, but also with enduring the trauma of the relationship, my second marriage, and everything that happened as a result of that, ending up a single parent overnight again, being homeless, all of the things that stemmed from that relationship. The second time, it was like I remember telling God, I feel like you drew the wrong name out of the hat for this trial because I do not have the strength to be able to get through this. I just don't. I don't know who you think I am. I don't know why I am so cursed and so why you would hate me so much to inflict so much tragedy in my life. It was, I felt overlooked. I felt forgotten. I felt like I was sort of like the the one that was selected to go through all of the crap in life, to be honest. And I didn't understand it. I didn't understand what I did to deserve this. So I definitely had a very angry view at God, a very cynical, bitter view of God for quite some time. But I also knew it's kind of interesting because I also knew that his shoulders are big enough to handle whatever my emotion might be, that he created me, that nobody knows me better than he does. So why would I expect that whatever cynical view I had of him, he wouldn't be able to handle that? So yeah, it was definitely a process, and I didn't stay in that zone. Obviously, I feel like I have the closest relationship that I've ever had in my entire life now. And it's been a journey, but I mean that is our life experience, is experiencing all of the highs and lows and the depths of darkness and the highs of the beauty that life has to offer. And somehow God remains through it all.
He does, and so much of that resonates to me from a guy who was, some of my story is, I always had feelings of inadequacy as a kid, being left out, less than, looked over, just not worthy. And you talk about acceptance and rejection. I think those two
Mhm.
words are really profound for any human being because we all want to be accepted in life in a group of people. And nobody likes to be rejected. But when you start getting those things happening in your life to where you start rejected, you start questioning, like, what's wrong with me?
Yeah.
Like, why am I not being accepted by any group of people? And you touch about a lot of stuff just now. And I think God is bigger than any problem that we can have. We don't give him enough credit sometimes to realize, hey, listen, you are so much bigger than any problem I'm ever going to encounter on this earth. And I think for me personally, when I go through trials, and it's been multiple, as have you, I think he puts us in those trials to bring us closer to him. That's
Mm.
what I believe, and I think that wholeheartedly. So, you said something else here as well that I thought was pretty profound. You said that God is preparing you and the reader for something so great and massive beyond what we could dream this year. And he's shaping our character to withstand the inevitable challenges that come with the increased vibration and success. So,
Mm.
to your point, he's shaping our character through these trials, and we might not understand what's going to happen until 6 years down the road. We can look back and start connecting the dots, say, oh, now I know why you put me through this, so I can help somebody else get through it. And I think that's your
100%.
mission, and I love all of that. How do you look at obstacles these days in regards to things popping up in your business, in your life, and what you're into these days? How do you look at things now differently from the things you've experienced in the past, your mindset and the adversity that you face today?
That is a great question. And it is 180-degree change for me. My mindset is completely different. My understandings of these things are completely different. And for some people, they might even seem a little bit radical and a little bit extreme, but I'm okay with that because I'm radical and extreme. But I truly, in retrospect, overviewing my life from that panoramic lens, and we can always understand things much better from hindsight 2020, right? So now the way that I see it and the spiritual insight that I've been given as I've really leaned into fine tuning and really tapping into my spirituality in a very, very strong way, and also into my mindset, transforming my belief system, really analyzing my beliefs to see which ones were serving me, which ones were hindering me. That was a huge part of this process. But I truly understand now that all of the things that I was ashamed about, that I was criticized about, all of the pain was not meaningless suffering. It was actually building me up. It was setting me up. It was creating this warrior. And I know this sounds a little bit uncomfortable for some of us to say because we always talk about having faith in God, but now the way that I see it is that God had so much faith in me, in who he created me to be, to withstand the enormous pain pressures, which can sound counterproductive. It can sound that God is cruel, and I certainly have felt that. But the way that I see it now is all of those things that I wanted to run away from, the past that I was wanting to disassociate with, was intentionally, I don't want to say, okay, part of me wants to say orchestrated because I do see it that way. However, I don't see that God necessarily put all of this suffering on me. God can allow certain things to happen. I don't necessarily believe that he causes everything to happen. And that's a whole conversation right there. And there's a lot of interesting views on those different aspects. But for me, I see it as tools in my tool belt that I can now use to relate to other people. I can relate to someone who's been, enormously depressed, and someone who's dealt with body image issues and eating disorders and losing a baby and, step parenting and single parenting, and everything that I've been through makes me a freaking warrior. It's kind of like the way that I see it now is, you see these powerful people in the military, they're decorated with all of these different medals. And that's what I see for myself now is I see that I have all of these, it's like, oh, I got one more medal, one more medal, one more medal. And so, when you think of the story of Job, and Job, I am not an innocent person. I am human. I make mistakes. I have flaws. I have failures. But Job was supposedly, one of the most pure-hearted people in existence, and yet he was honed in on to endure all of these trials. And that's a story that was repeatedly brought to me in my own journey was, what about Job? What about Job? And what about Joseph? That was another one that was brought to my attention so many times, was that Joseph was an innocent person. He was, in many senses, a victim and was literally in prison, not because of anything he actually did, but because of false accusations, which I definitely related to, even though I didn't go to prison. I was falsely accused for many things. And a lot of people abandoned me. My best friends, some family members stopped talking to me, even though I was completely innocent in the situation. So in going through all of that, I now have, I wouldn't say that I'm completely invincible, but I will say that I have a much thicker skin. I will say that I'm a much stronger, I'm mentally much stronger, emotionally much stronger, all of the things. So it's really created me to be this person that I have grown to love and appreciate. I used to hate myself. And now I do have a love and appreciation for myself, not because I'm pious or because I think that I'm better than anybody else, but because I really love the person that I've grown into. But I had to choose to evolve in that way. That was not something that just happened. It wasn't something that, when you go through things, you have a choice of how you're going to interpret those things, perceive those things, what you're going to do with it. And I give absolute credit to God and how he's been with me and guided me in my life. And I also have to, I think that this is one mistake that we make. We have this um, humility. We're taught to be humble, and that's great. And I think humility and humbleness is extremely important. But I think that you also have the choice to partner with whatever God might want to do in your life. And we all have that choice. Not everybody chooses it. But I had to make that choice because if I wanted my story to be any different than it was, and I was determined to not have that trauma and all of the things that happened be the story that I would tell for the rest of my life. I wanted to tell a different story. And in order to do that, I had to be a partner in transforming my own life, my own mindset, my own trajectory of where the direction of my life would go. So it really is a relationship between the spiritual, between the divine and us partnering in whatever he wants to do with our lives. And that's how we transform.
Yeah, and it's difficult because our flesh and the worldview of how things are today, like it's a constant battle mentally. For I don't know about you, but for me, I still struggle with a lot of stuff. But I want to touch on something you said earlier about the abandonment of your friends. And for me, all the trials and stuff I went through personally, God removed a lot of people out of my life through those hurts and habits and hangups. And do you think that maybe he was doing that with you as well, like getting people out of your life that weren't going to help you foster where you were going, what the plans he had for you? That's how I interpret that. And how does that relate? How does that resonate with you?
I think that for sure that can be an element of it. And I think some of it is just, human choice. People can choose to stick with you or leave, and that's okay. I actually have no bitterness towards anybody who has made the decision, because in the personal evolution that I've gone through intentionally, I now understand that people come into your life for different reasons at different times. Sometimes it's a lifetime, sometimes it's just a season. And I have no bitterness at all when people walk away, or I've been ghosted by best friends that literally just stopped talking to me, and I had no explanation, no understanding. I was blocked, and there's nothing to base that off of that I'm aware of. And that was very hard because it can sort of trigger those abandonment wounds or those rejection wounds. And the relationship that I now have with triggers, where I understand the reason for triggers and why those happen and how helpful those actually are, I don't actually get angry with anybody about any of that. It can be hurtful, but I'm not angry about it. And I've also learned that this is sort of a natural process of evolution. So if you're someone who is intentionally growing and evolving, it can create a gap between, sort of like where you are evolving to and the people who are in your world. And that can create some dissonance, some discomfort with the people who are in your life. And I've found personally that, as I've changed my mindset, as I've grown and evolved, some people will fall away and some people will take it almost as an invitation to evolve as well. So there's kind of like this nice little evolution that's happening between you, and your relationship just continues to deepen and develop and grow. And then other people, it's too it's too uncomfortable. And some people will literally tell you, who do you think you are? This isn't who you are. And you might even feel some imposter syndrome, or like some of that will resonate because you don't, because you're a humble person, you don't want people to think that you think that you're above anybody else, but you can't let those things stop you. The people who drop out, I now believe, are it's just part of the process, and you learn to bless and release that, let it go. And it can feel lonely, it can feel hurtful, but I found that God will always bring new people in who are in alignment with where you're at that level. And who knows how long that will happen. That could be, you have to give yourself that flexibility for every level to produce, new people, new relationships, new connections, new opportunities. And then old stuff will fall away, and it doesn't always feel good. It rarely feels good, but it's necessary.
Yeah, I resonate with all that, man. And I think what it is essentially is that when you have a really big dream and a mission, you know what your purpose is in life, and it's so intentional that when you start talking about it with other people, it scares the living daylights out of them, because they're like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, time out! You mean you're not just going to go to a job for the next 30 years and retire at 65 and start living your life?" Hell no,
Yeah.
I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that.
Right.
That's not the life I want for myself. And that's not the life
Yes.
you want for yourself. And it scares a lot of people when you start talking like that, because they don't really understand where all that comes from, because they haven't been in our journey. They haven't been through the trial. They haven't been through the fire to understand why we want to do this. And I think that's critically important, as far as our whys, to keep us moving and focused. And when those naysayers pop up, and they're going to continue to pop up for the rest of our days, for sure.
If you're someone who has a wildly different mentality, and I mean, I am, and probably the reason why we're connected is because you are as well, it can be very interesting because when I was working in corporate and I would talk about being an entrepreneur and one day getting back into singing and speaking and it's almost like sometimes people look at you with this, what? Or I've had people tell me, well, good luck with that. That I'm going to spend my 25 years, get my pension, and that's going to be my life. And I have no disrespect. It's like, you do you, I'm not seeing my way as any better than your way. It's not that. It's just that I know that I know that I know that my path is meant to be wildly different from what is traditional. And people of that traditional mindset, it's fine. It's fine. I'm not negating that, but it's just not me. And so you have to get very comfortable with being uncomfortable. You have to get very comfortable with people not understanding you, misunderstanding you, sort of like miscategorizing. There's just all this stuff. You may feel like an alien almost sometimes, where you just don't fit in anywhere. And I think the important thing to realize is that some people are here on this planet to do things that don't make sense. And the people that we read about in our history books, the people who are legends, most of the time when you talk to those people, I think of people like Elon Musk, or inventors, thought leaders, Jordan Peterson. I mean, all these different people who are oftentimes made fun of. They're oftentimes mischaracterized, misunderstood, and they're very lonely a lot of times. And I know Elon talks about being very lonely because not many people understand that mentality, but that is the mentality of a trailblazer and someone who is here to do things that don't make sense, or someone who is here. Sometimes people refer to it as ahead of your time. So you have to know that you actually weren't meant to fit in. You don't fit in because you're not meant to fit in. And so why would you? And it's very, very uncomfortable, especially if you're someone who is a deep feeler. I'm a very, very feeling person. I'm an empathetic person. I'm a highly sensitive person. And that can feel so hard and painful to be staring in the faces of people thinking you're absolutely crazy, and to feel like you can't even express some of the deepest parts of your heart, your soul, your dreams, your visions, because people would think that you're legit nuts. And so when you can find people, thankfully with social media, I've been able to connect with some people who do have a similar mentality. And it is the best feeling in the world to feel like someone finally understands.
Yeah, true that, man. I mean, all that stuff resonates to me. And I think about not fitting in, particularly as a kid. And like, I understand now why I never fit in, because I wasn't like any of those people.
Yes.
As much as I tried to fit in, as much as I did all these crazy things to be accepted, I realize now that excuse me, that I wasn't like any of those people. And now I'm really okay with that because that's like my superpower. That's your superpower. And
Yes.
I have a saying, most people are born original, but they die a copy. Like we are unique, our stories are unique. Nobody can take that from you, nobody can take that from me. And that is why I love podcasting. That's why I love meeting people like yourself who just want to share. And speaking of sharing, why do you think people are so unwilling to be vulnerable? What have we done to ourselves that just, why can't we just sit in vulnerability and like connect on a level that is just so much more than surface?
From my perspective, it is truly that concern about what people will think. It's judgment of self, it's judgment of others. We've been conditioned to think that our mistakes and our failures, the pain that we've endured, is something to keep quiet. It's something to brush under the rug, to keep in the closet. You don't want to talk about that stuff. Nobody wants to hear about that. We're told that it's too dark, it's too heavy, it's too this or that. And I feel like for myself, I definitely felt like that. I did not want to talk about things. And I found that in keeping everything private, I know some people are very private, and that's okay. I'm not shunning anybody who's very private, but it is hard to be vulnerable. It's hard because people can be cruel. It's hard because people will judge, people will criticize. And as I started intentionally being more vulnerable about my story, the things that I've been through, um, and not just the parts that I can claim to be a victim about, the parts that I have to own as my own misgivings, my own failures, my own mistakes. Um, that is hard. It takes a lot of strength, of courage, of bravery to publicly, because I do these podcast interviews. I have no idea who's going to watch this. I have no idea what people are going to think, how it's going to land, what's going to be misinterpreted. People can take anything and twist it into anything that they want. So that can be scary. But I remember the first time when I was 21.